So hi, so I'm Gretchen, and I currently work at the Colorado Department of Education. I used to be a charter school leader, I used to be a teacher, I used to be a school designer for expeditionary learning, and I used to be a kid in a house where we built stuff out of wood a lot. And so I feel like it's funny, the whole maker thing feels incredibly comfortable to me, like basement comfortable to me. I still have a wood shop at my house. I married a guy who also likes to build things, so we build a lot of stuff a lot of times. But what they asked me to come and talk to you about was about how it works to lead change. And given what I've just told you about my past, I've definitely been in places where change comes a little faster and easier. Oh, look, now I have a microphone. Also, I'm chewing gum, which I think is kind of inappropriate, but otherwise I would be coughing at you, so I'm very sorry for the weird smack. But when I was a charter leader, for example, in terms of leading change, if something wasn't working, we just sort of call everyone in a room and be like, hey, this thing's not working. What should we do? Let's fix it. Let's change that tomorrow. And as long as we were working together as a team, we could make changes across our school really quickly because we were really small and nimble and we had permission. And now I work at the State Department of Education, which is like the opposite of that, right? It is a giant bureaucratic entity. Our job is to implement statute. Our job is to help schools and districts understand statute and implement it with quality. But I work in this little part of the department that's called Innovation and Choice. And we have a sort of other job, which is to try and help the department learn how to become a system which is an innovation system. Right, so we're trying to help the department figure out how to learn, how to adapt, so that the department can become a model of a more responsive system, so that districts can become models of more responsive systems, so schools can, so classrooms can. And at the department, we talk a lot about this because there's we're supposed to be implementing standards, and you may feel a lot of different ways about our state standards, I suppose, because there's a lot of politics around that. But however you feel about them, our new standards have a very different set of verbs in them that describe kids doing a lot more thinking than our standards used to describe. So they say a lot of things like analyze, reason, synthesize, compare, contrast, justify. Like those verbs are all over the standards. And we sort of have this working theory that if you want kids to do that in classrooms, then teachers also have to be able to do that. And schools have to, and districts have to. And so we're actively questioning what is the role we have in making it hard for people to be able to do that. So that is what I've been kind of working on the last couple years at CDE. So that's the context in which I'm sharing these things with you. They really are just sort of like musings from the last couple of years of trying this in a place where change is hard. Because I think hopefully these will be lessons that if you're in places where change is not so hard, it would help you accelerate things. Also, I want to announce that I had a totally different font, and so I believe the formatting will be crazy. So I apologize for that. So one thing I've learned, so I was so glad to hear you talk about empathy building, because building empathy is hugely important, and people talk about it, of course, in design thinking, but if you're trying to manage change, it's also really important. And one of the things that I've done, for example, in the last couple of years is engage a lot of folks in talking to me a lot about our accountability system and assessment system, so I can understand more precisely what they're frustrated with, right? There's some frustrations that are just sort of like, oh, whatever, like, I live in a small community. I want to be able to control a lot of things about things in my small community for good reasons, and I'm just sort of resistant to the idea of state testing. That's one kind of thing. But when you really get down and talk to people about it, it's way more specific, and when it's more specific, it's stuff that you can help with, right? So, for example, one piece of feedback that we've gotten that's very specific from students is that it doesn't have an adequate return on investment. For the time they spend in the assessments, the quality of information they get back about themselves is not good enough. That is really useful information. Okay, that's better than just, I don't like testing or I have a political value around testing. That is a kid's experience that we can work with. So empathy building as a way to think about not just how to manage change, but also how to figure out what is the direction of change, I think is really important. And it's sort of strangely absent in schools. I think lots of other industries would tell you this is a normal thing that they do. We don't often talk about our students or our parents or teachers as users in our system or customers in our system. And so empathy building is big. The other thing is I met this guy, definitely creepiest job title ever, Chief Behavior Scientist at Microsoft, Matt Wallert. I went to South by Southwest EDU this year, which if you ever can find anybody to let you go there so that you don't have to pay billions of dollars to go by yourself, I definitely recommend. It's just one of the nerdiest places I've ever been, which is so satisfying and fun to be in a place with so many nerds. Like, I saw so many educators with Google Glass at South by Southwest, like just walking around super nerdy on their Google Glass all day long. But I met Matt. I had a little mentoring session with Matt. And his job title is as creepy as you think. He's a psychologist who works at Microsoft to help teams at Microsoft figure out how to better move themselves in the direction they need to go in their project. So he's all about changing people's behavior. And what Matt taught me was that people are resistant to change either because they haven't had the right incentive or because there's a barrier or a fear that's in the way. This is everything you know from like Pavlov's dog, right? But it's more, at least for him, it's like, it's a lot more. and I think that's important combined with empathy, not because you want to be manipulative or lie to people or anything naughty like that, but because if you really know what is the reason that they would do this, or you really know the reason that they're fearful about it, then you can help with that, right? Again, not because you're trying to manipulate or not because you're trying to trick people, but because you can help with what's the real problem. And so I think a lot of times it's easy with kids to assume you know why they're resistant to something, or it's easy with colleagues to assume you know why they're resistant. But I would encourage you to figure out a way to really ask them and find out and empathize, because sometimes the answer is surprising, and when you find it out, you have such an easier time offering them a path forward that feels good to them. So that's one thing I've learned at the department. Another one is the nature of the goals shape the strategy. We have some history of these things not being aligned, and when they're not aligned, they question your integrity, right? If you say, for example, like what I just said to you, gosh, we believe in critical thinking in classrooms. We believe in that so much that we're going to make a binder of resources, and we're going to make every teacher in the state come to mandatory training about that for 2 hours next summer. Right? Then we don't have integrity as the people trying to lead that change. And again, this is a place where I think schools have missed and districts have missed, and we certainly have missed before, that if you are trying to lead in one direction, but your strategy is contrary to what you say you're after, it fails. So these are a couple things that I run around saying a lot at the department. I can't pretend these are other people's words. These are mine. But I am talking with a lot of folks at the department about the first one, and then only with like people who are my friends and can handle me being sort of crass on the second one. But offering decisions rather than directions is a big deal. And I think because I've been doing this work around accountability, I've been talking with folks a lot about what it means to feel accountable, and that's not necessarily how people feel in our current accountability system. And I think having a decision that you make is something that makes you feel accountable, versus if I come and I say, man, your third grade reading scores are terrible. They are abysmal. But you know what? It's so good I'm here because I have all the answers for you. Follow my directions. Follow my directions and your third grade reading will be amazing. So if you are compliant and you follow my directions and it doesn't work, who is accountable? It's me, right? So as often as we can, and I think this is true at all levels of the system, all the way down to when I was a classroom teacher, as often as I could offer a kid a decision, I would try to do that. And I think this is something to think about, again, all the way up systemic levels. And another thing is, I think sometimes choice for students gets mischaracterized as like, let them choose whatever they want to study. That is fun, I will admit. But there's some stuff kids should learn. The choice about what to study isn't as important as like what strategy to try, what approach to try right now, what to do first. Those little tiny decisions of learning add up in a very cumulative way that, at least I believe, makes kids feel real ownership of learning. So tiny decisions, I think, are the ones to pay attention to. This means, of course, and it's ironic as I stand up here pontificating right now, that you want to have a role where you are facilitating more than pontificating, right? Where you're facilitating them knowing how to make good decisions, whether that's students or whether that's teachers in your building, if you're a school leader or whoever, right? That if you acknowledge that for people to feel ownership, they need to make decisions, or if you just acknowledge that whatever, classroom doors close and people make decisions all day long anyway, then instead of trying to control those decisions or constrain those decisions, if you try and figure out how to help them be good decision makers, then you're going to have to embrace the role of facilitator. So another lesson learned. This graphic comes from some good colleagues of ours, two different organizations. One's called the Learning Accelerator. You can find it on their website, or Two Revolutions, which is the firm that sort of built this for the Learning Accelerator. They did a bunch of work trying to build up a sort of self-assessment tool for whether you have a culture of innovation. And this is their sort of framework of like, what are the components of a culture of innovation? There's another graphic I did not include where they blow each of these out into like 10 other little tiny modules off of it. It's sort of overwhelming, and the self-assessment tool is really long, but it's a great tool, actually, if you're trying to figure out if you have a good culture of innovation. But the thing I wanted to point out is the learning agenda, way over on that side. I don't know if I don't have a pointer. It's over there, learning agenda, okay? I think one of the things that makes the culture of an organization be one that is an innovation culture is that learning agenda is used on purpose to change the way that all the other components of the place happen, right? So if you really have a strong learning agenda as an organization, if you're going out and testing things in short cycle ways, as we were just hearing about before, you go out and you try and you test this thing and you learn something, and what you learn causes you to make changes in how you use time, or how you use money, or what is a priority for people, or what is a strategy that you're going to invest in more deeply. I think that the key about being in an innovation culture, or trying to plan to have an organization that innovates, is that you need to have a consistent commitment to organizational learning. And I think the place where we fall down a lot on this is actually the same place that you highlighted, which is the planning to measure. I have been myself part of projects in schools where we had an awesome idea. Everyone high-fived. It was totally awesome, right? Do you think it's awesome? Do you think it's awesome? Yes, yes. Let's try. Okay, try. Try. Trying is so much fun. I love trying. Oh, good times. When we're done, and we go, what do you think? How was it? And I say, I loved it. I think that was better, right? And a lot of times in schools, that's as rigorous as we are in trying something new, especially little tiny stuff. And so I think there is a sort of discipline that we need to develop in schools about planning on purpose to learn. Don't leave that to chance. Don't have it be that at the end some kid has an insight that finally tells you what was the big learning that came from that thing that just happened. Plan. Plan to observe for student behavior and see if it's different. Plan to look for components of student work that change in some way. Plan to interview kids at the beginning and interview them at the end. Plan to do something so that you learn on purpose. And then the other part of that is that when you learn those things, I think sometimes in schools, when people learn those things, it's sort of like, that's cool, that person learned that thing. And they might be sort of like rewarded by their staff. I was talking with a group of educators about this earlier this week, where they said the culture in their school actually is to sort of celebrate those people and make them exclusive in their staff, where they're like, that person learned a really cool thing. They did something really awesome, and they sort of come to a staff meeting and they present about it. But when they present, they talk all about how it was awesome. They don't talk about what stunk on the second day, right? They don't talk about where they stumbled. They don't talk about where it was hard. And they don't talk about it in such a way that the intention is for everyone to learn from that, so the school system gets better. And I think that teacher that shared that with me this week, I don't think that's all that unusual, what she has experienced in schools. So this idea of don't leave learning to chance, right? Don't think that you hope you'll learn something at the end of trying, but instead really plan on purpose to learn from what you try. Because if you're trying to move change inside your system, it's the learning that will be persuasive, right? In the end, if a kid who behaved a certain way that looked disengaged, showed up, engaged, produced, demonstrated learning in a way that was different, and you have taken the time to note that, that is what will be persuasive to others if you're trying to make that change happen elsewhere. And so we think about that at the department too when we're trying things, when we have pilots. We plan for how will we know if the pilot is working? How can we know really fast if the pilot is working? So we don't waste time, but also so we can share that quickly so other people will want to pilot the same thing in their work. I think this might be the last one. I can't tell. It'll be exciting for all of us when we see what the next slide is. Move the easy parts first. There's a whole range of things about this, right? Like early adopter people are easy parts. Small stuff are easy parts. Things that are routine, right? Like I have talked with a lot of teachers who, like for example, if trying to change the culture in the classroom so there's higher levels of student ownership, that the place that starts is by talking about the first 10 minutes of class. Like you have a routine already for how you do the first 10 minutes of class. What if you just change that routine? What if that's all you did, is change that routine, and then you see what that does, right? That's an easy change. So pick the easy stuff and start there. This is important for reasons I'm sure we've talked about a lot in other settings, right? Of like early wins are important in terms of building momentum. But also, again, if you've committed to learning, you'll learn some important things with these sort of small things that will help you do whatever you're trying to do next that's more ambitious better. Right, so start with the easy stuff. And I think that's it. That's the end of the lessons. And again, I have to apologize for my font because they were really spaced beautifully before when the font was different, so I apologize. Anyone who's OCD in the crowd, I'm really sorry for you right now. So again, this is not like a doctrine or anything. This is really just observations. And I'd love to hear questions from people who are working in places where you have changed things going on, or ideas that you have about other things you've noticed about what helps move change forward in your organizations. Yeah?
For me, I've always worked in small entrepreneurial ventures and never, as I think Eric said, I'm unemployable. Or it's not like that. I don't work that way. And I wonder, how, this is not about that, but how hard has it been for you to work in a place where the change is so slow?
Yeah, it's real hard is the answer to that. I mean, it's difficult. Like when you're in a classroom, right? If you have your own entrepreneurial endeavor and you have your hands on it directly, or for me when I was in a classroom and I had my hands on it that way, the results of your effort come so quickly, and you can use them to learn so quickly, but also to just feed yourself. And it took me a long time actually to figure out what were the signals that things were working. And so it was hard. And I had to be given some very direct coaching when I first came to the department about how to manage being satisfied when I was fundamentally unsatisfied with the pace of things. And it is really difficult. The reason I have persisted is that I think if we are successful, it will matter a lot. Yeah. Thanks. Hope so.
Can you talk about your views on change getting pushed from the bottom up in educational settings? Because I feel like the framework of what we're talking about here is pushing change up the chain rather than having it come from the top down.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your views and how you could take that to the division of to Ed and have them work with that?
Yeah, so my team has been working on an initiative around next generation learning for about 2 years. And the vision for that work is organized around the idea that there are some different kinds of competencies that students need leaving the K-12 system now. Many of the things we were hearing about earlier, right? That the categories that have been identified are professional, like academic, yes, obviously, duh. Then there's professional competencies that have to do with things like I can manage time, I can collaborate, I can manage a project, that sort of stuff. Entrepreneurial competencies that have to do with being able to manage risk, to be able to survive failure, to be able to position yourself well because you see an opportunity and you can make interesting connections. And then there are personal competencies that are about knowing yourself well, so you position yourself in a way that your risk is managed, right? And that you play to your strengths, but you also have friends who have strengths that aren't yours. And then lastly, civic competencies, which have to do with the degree to which you feel an obligation to make use of the capacity you have, right? Like very old democratic ideas. And the reason I shared that is that framework of the sort of vision of next-gen learning is not anything we generated as a state. We spent 2 years in the field working with early adopters in that space, talking to industry about what really does the next generation of graduates need to be ready for what you have. And we facilitated those discussions, we learned with them, and we synthesized. And that has been really powerful, actually. Like last September, that had been going on for a while, and that model sort of existed, and From there, we've been generating characteristics of learning environments, right? Classroom environments that would foster those, or system characteristics that would enable those learning environment characteristics to finally get to those. So like a whole bunch of work has happened in the last few years with that. And we've taken that same approach with all of it. We're here to facilitate and to capture learning because our system should learn to be smarter. And we don't think our job is to tell you what that is, but we think our job is to help you all come to some common understanding about that that's informed by industry and post-secondary, which is hard for you to do by yourselves. And we had last September this convening where we pulled a bunch of educators, a bunch of industry people, a bunch of legislative people, and a bunch of sort of education advocate folks. And we asked them to engage with that framework as a way to test it, right? And we said, to what extent does this describe your work life? So you're an adult, you have a role in your neighborhood, in your community, in your job, in your whatever. Not only which of these competency areas matter, but in what proportion, and we kind of went further with them. And we learned a ton that day from those folks. And so I think as long as we are willing to adopt the disposition of we are not experts at the answer, we are experts at facilitating people and figuring out the answer, then we can do that really well. And I think it's important that somebody at the top of the system is behaving that way, because if everything is coming from the bottom up but it's not organized, it also tends to fail. And we have this work going on with 3 districts, I don't know if any of them are here, Thompson, D11, and Adams 50, who've been part of a project with us in the Colorado Education Initiative for about 2 years now, that is all about trying to make change happen in a systemic way. And what drew all 3 of those districts to that project was that they all had been part of top-down efforts that had failed, bottom-up efforts that had failed, and they had this realization that if you don't pay attention to the whole system, if you don't facilitate change across the whole system, even though that is daunting and scary, it's not going to stick. And so we've learned a lot from those 3 districts and are trying to play those roles. I cannot say that our whole department behaves that way, right? Like, I exist in a weird corner of our department, but it's been in my unit plan for 3 years that I infiltrate other people's work at the department, right? So, and like, it's not like I wrote it in there and no one saw it. Like, the commissioner had to sign off on that and say that that's what he wanted us to be doing. So I think there is a way for it to happen, and I guess, again, what I've learned is that just as much as top-down doesn't work, I don't think bottom-up by itself does either. I think it has to be facilitated in both ways. At least that would be my theory so far.
You talk about initiatives and pilot programs that show some success. What sort of structure do we have in place to share those successes, to get those models out there, you know, that people don't have to, yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Because actually we've started a new initiative about doing that. Oh, we created something called the Center for Best Practice, which is intended to be an entity inside the department that collects stories, not just of our work, actually primarily not of our work, but of work that happens in the field that works for some purpose, right? So, so for example, actually, I'm going to talk about Peter's work. This is Lene, her husband is Peter, he works with me. So Peter runs turnaround at the department, and he has a network going on where they have decided, you know, there's always this question when you have limited resources, which is always everyone in education. I hope you all don't think that the State Department is any different. Most legislation comes to us with a line that says that funding will not be provided, we encourage you to seek gifts, grants, and donations. It's literally in legislation. Anyway, so Peter is running turnaround. It's this crazy thing, right? Trying to get like our lowest performing schools to be really good schools. It's a really hard job. Totally underfunded. When you have limited resources, you have to make some decision about how you'll make the group small so you can invest deeply. And their decision was to invest in those who are wanting to do it big. So if you are to have a culture inside your school, your low-performing school, that says, this is an urgent issue, we have got to fix this, we're going to go after it, then that's how they do it. So Peter and his group have been doing this work for a year now, and stories are starting to emerge from that network. And they just got together last week, actually, and we're sharing some of those stories. And I was there to help document some of those things so that we can produce stories that we distribute very widely that tell the story, but not just the like, hey, feel good, this cool turnaround thing happened, but talk about the uglies of the start of the story and the pain points along the way, and identify and sort of connect to the story digitally tools and resources or people that were helpful to that effort, to try and be able to put out there that learning so that we play a role we think we should have, which is that we have a unique ability to know where good things are happening and we are known statewide, which means we could distribute those good things. So we're just starting that work, actually, with stories coming out this fall. Yeah.
And do you have some sort of online community built around this? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we're still actually trying to figure out, we did some user input to try and figure out the best way to distribute stories in terms of both format and location, right? And have figured out that it's some mix of like video text resource, and we have a plan for that. It's interesting because our website is not the place people want to go to find awesome stories. And so the question is like, do you try and make it be that? Or do you go somewhere where that's already happening, or do you do both? And we're not resolved on that question yet. That's a great question.
So much, I know we had a babysitter.
I know, we do have a babysitter.
We're
That's
we're
true.
over time, but.
Thank you.
Thank you.